Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Ready to outsmart the competition? Try UltraLearning with our guest, Scott Young. Scott, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Now, UltraLearning is I guess you'd call it a new way of learning, and it's also the title of your book. So can you tell us what UltraLearning really is?
So UltraLearning is really an intersection of two different ideas. So one is learning that is sort of initiated and self-directed by the person who's doing it. And I'm doing this mainly to contrast the normal way we think about learning, which is going to school, sitting through classes, doing what you're told. Whereas I wanted to talk about a lot of people who I mentioned in this book who've done some really incredible things by pursuing education sort of in a way that doesn't involve classes, in ways that involve taking on unusual steps and often getting much better results.
Now, what was something called the MIT Challenge? I know you were involved in that, and I think that'll help our listeners understand this even better.
Sure. So the MIT Challenge was a project that I took on about 8 years ago. Starting in October 2011 and ending in September 2012. And so the idea was that I had just graduated from university. I had done a business degree, and I'd been thinking that maybe I'd picked the wrong major, that I kind of wanted to learn computer science. I mean, computer science is where a lot of the good jobs are. It's where a lot of interesting stuff is coming out. Entrepreneurs, people like this are all getting their start with learning how to program things. But I didn't really want to go back to school. I didn't want to spend another 4 years, take out student loans, go live in a dorm room. I wanted to, have the knowledge because I already had a degree, but I didn't really want to go back to school. And so around this time, I stumbled across some classes that were taught by MIT, but put online for free. So these are the actual lectures from the MIT classes, assignments, exams with the solution keys, and they just kind of put it up there, and you can do whatever you want with it. And so around this time, I was kind of playing around with one of the classes, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really good. This is kind of better than classes that I did when I was doing my actual degree. And so it just kind of, this sort of light bulb moment happened of, has anyone ever tried to do something like a degree before? Has someone ever tried to, use these resources to map out what you would do in a computer science degree, but do it at home and do it without having to go to classes? And so this sort of led to some research, and I decided to focus on a little bit of a simplification, because obviously going to school involves lots of things. You have to do, school presentations and essays, and there's student council and clubs and fraternities. So I wasn't going to do any of that. I was going to just strip it down to the essentials, which in my case I felt was being able to learn enough to pass the final exams, and in computer science case, do the programming assignments. Everything else was just a tool to help me learn that information. And so with this a little bit of a simplified constraint, I started, playing around with this and realizing that there's some ways that you might even be able to learn a little bit faster. So for instance, normally when you're sitting in a class, you have to show up at the same time, you have to sit through the whole class, and you don't have any, even if it's boring, you have to sit through it. And then when the class is done, then you have to walk to your next class. Whereas if it's a recording, you can watch it at 1.5 times the speed and get it done more quickly. And if you don't understand anything, you can just pause and hit rewind. So using some of these ideas and something else, I kind of thought it might be sort of fun to take on a bigger challenge. And so the challenge was to not only try to do the basically 33 classes that constitute an MIT computer science undergraduate curriculum, but also to try to do that content in 12 months instead of a normal 4 years. So this is sort of one of my first big projects that I did. And I think it's an example, although not the only way this kind of ultra-learning philosophy can kind of manifest itself.
Now, so just to put it quickly, you took the courses for MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the finest schools in the country, a 4-year course. You had all the courses that they would give the typical student who came in the field you wanted, which I think you said was computer technology or some variation on there, and you took it in a year. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't take the summer off, so I guess there's that's one little difference from, from an MIT student. So I didn't have summer vacation. But in the same sense, yeah, I was working on it, and a big part of that was that I had this reduced criteria, but also a laser-focused approach of just how can I get through and learn the material as efficiently as possible for me, rather than, you submit an assignment, you wait a couple weeks to hear back, and then, I got this question wrong, I got this question right. I could just do the assignments and then do it one question at a time, and just as soon as I finish the question, check the solution. What don't I understand? What do I understand? And then using these sorts of ideas, I was through it a little faster. Now, I mean, it was a lot of work, but at the same time, I didn't have to spend 4 years. I didn't have to pay tuition, and I was able to get, even if it wasn't perfectly what an MIT student would do, I was able to cover pretty much what an MIT student covers in their undergraduate curriculum, and I never had to leave my home, right?
Now, this almost sounds too good to be true. So you didn't have to attend classes or even be checked in or anything else. You out of, I guess, diligence, either did the assignment or did a variation on the assignment that would be part of the lesson plan, if I understood correctly. And I guess the biggest magic word was, did you say there was no cost?
Well, the only cost I had was basically paying for used textbooks. So if I were really budget conscious, I could have done it for free, but, go to a library and try to get this textbook and have it delivered to the library and rent it out. Like, I could have tried to do that, but that would have probably taken more time. So I did spend money on used textbooks, but I didn't pay tuition. And, I mean, you're saying about the obvious drawback of doing this way is that you don't get the degree. You don't have the MIT seal on your diploma when you're going out for jobs. But that's actually very interesting, because once I finished the project, there was a bit of a discussion. This is sort of an unusual thing, and there was a Reddit thread. Reddit's a popular website where people discuss things, and there was a big discussion about this project, and some of the people who were there were saying things like, well, it's too bad that employers only really care about degrees. And in that same thread, there are people who, claim to be hiring managers for different companies saying, no, this is the person that we want to hire, someone who is self-motivated and can tackle difficult projects. Like, this is exactly who we want to hire. So I think, yes, there is a drawback that when you do self-education, sometimes you don't get the credentials. And I mean, if you're going to be a doctor, for instance, that's going to be very important to have the credentials. But even if you are a doctor, you still have to learn things. You still have to approach things in your continuing professional practice to be a good doctor. So the ideas of UltraLearning aren't just about how do you get out of going to school, but really, how do you get the skills that you want? In my case, it was computer science, but in your case, it might be something different.
Scott, this is fascinating to me. I want our audience to know that if they're just tuning in, they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. The smart guy we're talking to today is Scott H. Young, Young. His book is UltraLearning. And Scott, tell us a little more. If someone wants to follow up on this show and get more information, is there a website, and where can we get the book, UltraLearning?
Absolutely. Well, the book is published by Harper Business, so you can get it at Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, Amazon. It's also on Audible if you prefer listening to books. I'm narrating the book as well. And you can also go to my website, which is scotthyoung.com. That's SCOTTHYLUNG.com. And I have a lot more details about not only this project that I did, the MIT Challenge, but other projects that I've done since. So if you have any details or questions about how it all works and that kind of thing, I post everything there. So we only have a limited time to discuss it in this podcast, but you can check out more material about it there.
Now, did I understand too that I think you said somewhere in your book, or I have it in my notes, aggressive self-education, which is basically what this is really not that rare. I mean, there's others out there doing it, right?
Yeah, and it's, the reason that I wanted to write this book is that so many of us, when we think about, well, I want to be good at this thing, or I would like to improve in my job, or I would like to get a promotion, or I'd like to transition careers, for so many people, the gut reflex is, well, I don't know how to do that. I'd have to go to school. I'd have to study for 4 years in order to do this. And it's not even just about avoiding education. Like, how many skills are just never taught in school very well? Like, how many of us spent years taking high school Spanish classes and, we can't hablar en español. We have, tons of skills that are super important, whether it's public speaking, writing, things like this that are often, if they are taught in school, you certainly have to do a lot of learning on your own. So I wanted to write this book to kind of champion these stories, not just my own, but people who have done really incredible things with learning through unconventional approaches, so you can just see how many options there are out there for getting the skills that you need to really have a successful life.
Now, Scott, what do UltraLearners have in common? It must be a little bit of DNA that among the UltraLearners that give them the ability to do this on their own. Discipline, I guess, would be the word we'd use. To do this on their own, even if they can do it in a year, it keeps you quite busy, and especially something like MIT. That's not a school you can just kind of fluff your way through or skim by.
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably right. I think that this does require a lot of motivation, but I think what's really important is to have an example, to see someone doing something, and then that causes you to say to yourself, hey, maybe I could do that too. So, you know, the MIT Challenge was just one type of this thing. So I don't want to suggest that everyone here has to go out and try to do something similar to an MIT degree in 12 months. That's just one example, and maybe not the one that you would want to pursue. So for me, my introduction to this whole idea, the way that I kind of got introduced to people doing these sorts of learning feats, was with a guy named Benny Lewis. Now, this is when I was in my actual undergrad, or sort of my, formal one that I got the credentials for in business school, and I went on exchange for a year in France. And one of the things I wanted to do when I went to France is I was really eager to learn French. I thought it would be really cool to come back and be able to speak French. And I went there, and it was actually really difficult. I mean, all the people around me spoke to me in English all the time. I felt like I was studying a lot, but wasn't making very much progress. And so it was around this time that I was introduced to a guy named Benny Lewis. And like I said, he was kind of one of these ultra learners. He was someone who was taking on, learning languages, but he wasn't taking classes. He wasn't, taking 8 years of study to do this. He had a website that he called, and he still has it. It's called Fluent in 3 Months, about his quest to try to learn as much as possible in a language in just 3 months. And so he would go to a new country, and instead of sitting through hundreds of hours of classes or playing on apps for hours and hours and hours, he would just start speaking to people. He would have a phrase book, and he would start practicing. And he would use that sort of initial conversations to go into immersion and really start building his linguistic skills. And so he was someone who kind of was this first little, flashlight of what might be possible if you took learning really seriously and you were really focused on what is the most effective method. So, when I was in France, I thought, well, maybe a year won't be enough to learn French, even just to a level where you could have conversations comfortably. And, here's someone who's attempting fluency in 3 months. It just seemed, totally out of reach. But I think he's just an example of people who really take learning seriously. And, even if you don't want to become fluent in 3 months, you can apply some of these same ideas to, get a bit better at the language that you want to learn. Or similarly, my own project, you could, maybe you don't have to do a whole degree, but maybe you could learn to write some simple computer programs, or learn a bit about marketing, or learn a little bit about something that you care about.
Scott, again, this is fantastic to me and fascinating, and I think to our audience also. I think this is going to be the wave of the future, and I think this is why people are going to be so interested in it. Unfortunately, at this point in the show, we have to take a brief break and remind our audience that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Our guest today is Scott Young. He's talking about the book UltraLearning, and we'll find out more after this brief break.
90.3 WHPC reminds you that most party fouls are pretty dumb. Sometimes they land you in an unfortunate nickname, a nasty bruise, or make you the star of a few embarrassing social media posts.
But the damage usually ends there. Underage drinking and driving, however, is a party foul with real consequences.
Get busted, and you could pay fines, do community service, and lose your license.
Learn more at ultimatepartyfoul.org.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Ad Council, and the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Good morning, Uglyville!
Every ugly doll is unique.
I'm Moxie.
Bobo.
Wade.
Those close to me call me Slick Dog.
Which is not his name.
And every child is, too.
They can be pretty lovely Unbelievable.
That's why when you travel, you should make sure your child is in the right seat for their age and size.
That sounds pretty great to me.
Keep them safe by visiting nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Isn't that right, gibberish cat?
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, and today our guest is Scott Young, author of UltraLearning. Scott, is this just to get a job? Do most people do this to get a job? Are they looking to change a career, or is it just they're fascinated about learning about chemistry or art or something?
Well, all three of the above, right? So
Okay.
there are not only people who are doing this for a very concrete, professional reason, that they want to change careers, they want to improve the career they already have, they want to start a new business. But for a lot of the people I met, they were just interested in maybe learning a skill, and then it only was after they started pursuing it that they had really dramatic changes to their life as a result.
Now, are these people all very self-directed and I mean, like almost we would consider the military type person, and maybe not in demeanor, but just that they can focus on something for more extended periods than most people, let's put it that way?
Well, some of these more extreme examples clearly are someone, having an obsession that they just really care about, and then they put in a lot of time. But I think what's important to point out is not that you need to be putting in 80 hours a week in order to get the same sort of benefit. And so the idea that I talk about in the book is that what I care about is how do you spend each moment that you're trying to spend learning? How do you make it as optimized and effective as possible? How do you do the things that will actually make you good as opposed to things that just waste your time? And so what I find is that the people who do these UltraLearning projects, yes, they put in a lot of hours, especially if they're going to do something really dramatic, like trying to learn a language in 3 months or trying to do a degree program in less time. But at the same time, they're very focused on efficiency. So even if you only have, let's say, 20 minutes a day, that's still 20 minutes. You have to be very careful about how you spend that time, because it's very easy to do some things that, maybe that's not really going to get you to the destination, and you might spend 6 months, 9 months, a couple years, and find that you didn't really learn what you wanted to. Whereas if you pick the right approach, you can get those skills more quickly. So that's really what I try to talk about, and I think that's what the ordinary person who might be listening to this and thinks, oh, wow, this isn't for me, that's too extreme, how they can probably try to apply it.
So the person who says, gee, I can't afford college and I'm working kind of at that dead-end job and I'm only 30 years old, if I'm hearing this correctly, they could go back and take a business course, take several business courses or accounting, or start to learn the lingo and the professionalism of the business person and start to put themselves in a position to move up the line in whatever organization. Let's make it a restaurant that they're in, or clothing company, etc., retail store. And although they may not come out with a formal degree, it's costing them almost nothing except, as you said, for the textbook. And they will be able to present themselves with the knowledge that's required for that position. Does that kind of summarize it?
Oh, yeah. There's so many examples that I encountered of people who did basically what you're talking about. So Diana Faisenfeld was a New Zealand librarian who, she's nearing the end of her career. She's, maybe a decade away from retirement. And instead of just saying, what, my job is kind of becoming obsolete, I'm going to learn some skills that will add to my current set of skills, so not completely new career, add to my certain set of skills, but make me indispensable. So in her case, she realized that the world of libraries are changing and that it's about computers and technology. And so she did a little bit of study on the side, kind of the way I've described, to learn data visualization and a little bit of programming so that she could make charts and figure out how people are using books and things like this. And this turns out was a very valuable skill for making her career and giving her advancement, even though librarians as a whole are probably facing a bit harder times in our internet age as they might have been in the past. And similarly, people like Vishal Mani, who wanted to transition from his marketing role in a regular tech startup to working with machine learning and in the space of AI, and he wanted to be in that field. And so he did a little sabbatical, built up those skills so that he could get really good at it, and he got a job working, I believe he was working with Google's DeepMind, but I'd have to double check that. But basically the same idea, that he approached this UltraLearning process, acquired the skills he needed, and was able to translate that into the job of his dream.
Now, one of the things I'm thinking of as we're talking about this, and this is something I guess everybody who's ever gone to a college or a high school has said, oh, I'm stuck with so-and-so for math or for English or history, and no one wants him or her. You can now pick, if I'm right, and please tell me, the best of the best, meaning not only are they maybe worldly known, but if someone is a really fantastic teacher, explainer, instructor, and that's what we want for organic chemistry, or that's what we want for English, we can get the best of the best from every school. So we could take 3 courses from St. John's, 5 from Hofstra, 3 from Harvard, and 4 from UCLA if we wanted. And that could all be part of our English degree or our chemistry degree. Is that what I'm hearing?
A lot of the schools put their stuff online for free, so it isn't, middle of nowhere university. It's these best schools that are putting this material. So in some ways, if you decide to go this approach of teaching yourself, you really do have access to some of the best teachers. And it's not just informal university-type classes like MIT's OpenCourseWare, and Stanford and Harvard and Yale also put up classes online, but also places like Khan Academy, which aren't really classes at all, but very specific video tutorials for very specific topics. So if you're struggling with high school algebra because your teacher doesn't explain it to you in a way you can understand, you just hop online and you can learn it that way. So really, we are living in a world where anyone can learn anything if they have the right tools and the right motivation. And so that's what I hope to give in this book, is to just give people that nudge and to give people some of those ideas to just get started.
Scott, you mentioned in the book that many of the assumptions about education are basically eroding, and I guess success in life going along with that. Do you feel this UltraLearning is kind of the beginning of a new frontier? It's like finding out that if you walked a little past California, you'd find a new land site that would have acres and acres and miles of land, where we think it's just going to be the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it just sounds like such a vast and wonderful promise that would make education available to so many more people at a very affordable rate, which is almost nothing. Am I hearing that correctly? It almost sounds too good to be true.
Well, I would say that there's both in our future kind of something worrying and also something hopeful. So the worrying thing is that we are living in a world where our assumptions about what you need to do to succeed are quickly eroding. It used to be that you could get a college degree and you would just be done. You would, you'd have all the skills you'd need. You just work at the factory or your job your whole life and you'd have a good middle-class lifestyle. And income inequality is rising. The middle class is eroding. A lot of the economic trends are just coming because that's not enough anymore. That in order to have a successful career, you have to be constantly learning, and you have to be learning things that are much more complicated. You have to understand computers, technology. You have to understand changing fields and globalization and, international markets. These are all changes that can make it harder to succeed for some people. But on the converse, the hopeful end is that we are also living in a world where it's really meritocratic in terms of the skills you want to learn. Really, you can go online and access the world's information at your fingertips. And so even though there are difficulties and challenges with that, the people who are armed with the right tools, the people who have the strategies to get what they need, to make plans, to learn new skills, to figure out what they need to do and to actually execute on that, those are going to be the people that rise up. So I think that UltraLearning, I don't want to say that it's the replacement for university. Rather, I want to say that it's really opening the kind of possibilities that we have. Because for some of us, maybe even you who are listening to this right now, going back to school isn't an option for that skill you want to have. And I want to try to write this book for those people, not just to say, hey, I don't want to go to school even though I could, but for all the people that it's too expensive, it's too much time, but they still want to have skills. They still want to have a career that they feel is meaningful and valuable. And so I think this is another possibility and one that might work for many people.
Scott, if someone's saying, gee, who is this interesting guest on The Secrets of Success today? The interesting guest is Scott Young. He is the author of a book, UltraLearning. And if you're as interested as I am, you'll want to know more. So, Scott, where is the website? Tell us where we can go to learn more about this.
Right. So you can check out my website at scotthyoung.com. That's SCOTTHYLUNG.com. And you can also check out the book UltraLearning. It's available at your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's even available on Audible where I'm narrating it. So if you prefer to listen, then you can listen to it that way.
And to our audience, if you're hearing this and saying, gee, I'd like to tell my father, my brother, make sure they hear it, you can go to nccradio.org and hear a podcast of this show, and then, of course, get out there and get the book and learn more about it, because it does seem to be a wave of the future. That's something that's going to be coming on, and it can open up doors, and most of our complaints are, gee, we take on such debt for a college education. Or even if you're just having a problem with one course, I would think you could go and take the best professor in the world and have him or her teach you organic chemistry or French or English, lit, whatever it is that you're having difficulty with. Scott, are there some fields where this works best and that you'd advise people to look at it if they're in a particular field?
Well, obviously, if we're talking about using this as an alternative for formal education, the biggest barrier is that some fields require credentials. So as I mentioned earlier, if you want to be a doctor, you need to have a medical degree. It's not possible to just go out there and practice because you know a lot about hearts and blood vessels and stuff. But there's a lot of fields where that's not the case. And there's certainly a lot of fields where even if you have a degree, so even if you're a lawyer, that doesn't mean you know everything about law. Maybe you don't know enough about law to be the best lawyer or to get into a field of law that you want to get into. And similarly, I think this is going to be the rule rather than the exception for most professions, that even once you have the degree, you still have to be learning a lot. You still have to keep on top of things if you want to have a successful career. So I think of this as being something that certainly works well for not only being able to acquire skills that either are not taught in school or are not taught very well in school, but then there's also a way of using this to supplement and to take whatever you learn in your professional life and take it further so that you don't just have a middle-of-the-road career where you have to work really hard but you don't get remunerated for it very well, to one where, you feel really great because you know how to do things that very few other people do.
And is this just a matter, if you can tell us in our last 20 seconds, is this just a matter of picking up a course book? I mean, how does someone find these courses online?
Well, you can find the courses by doing Google searches, but there's lots and lots of different ways for learning. So I highly recommend checking out the book. I talk about lots of different tactics you can use to apply to learn these kinds of skills. And courses, in particular, the kind like MIT OpenCoursera, are just one of many.
And for our audience, I think this is something, if nothing else, it's going to be fantastic around the cocktail table to talk about this. But I think if you're looking to advance in education or learn about something you may be always interested in and just couldn't take it in school or it didn't fit in your curriculum, this is some great opportunities. I urge you to get hold of the book, UltraLearning, by our guest, Scott H is his middle initial, Young, Y-O-U-N-G, is his last name. And Scott, give us that website real quick.
Yes, it's ScottHyoung.com, ScottHyoung.com.
Thanks so much for being with us today. We'd like to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.